I don't know if y'all happen to see. This is apropos of nothing. But the Cloudcast podcast. Do you listen to them?
The what podcast?
The Cloudcast.
No,
I haven't.
So they interviewed Gene Kim the other day or recently on their most recent episode, and he's the Phoenix Project guy. It's really good.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard him on a podcast a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What's he up to?
Just released the Unicorn Project.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
I like those things. It's weird because I've never read either of them straight through, but I know all of it just from having read articles and listened to interviews and stuff like that. So I know all the stuff. Never read the books, but I'm a big fan of him and of kind of the culture side of DevOps, as far as don't do things the way that they have always been done. Thinking of continual improvement and just kind of the process of how things connect together, which is not like some companies. I don't know if you know, like some companies are not friendly to this because it involves, kind of, it could go against the grain of people that have some sort of perceived political power at a company, and it rubs people the wrong way. Some people, and it's just such a strange phenomenon to me.
Yeah, thankfully I've not run into that myself. But I've been at the same company. I don't go around see what other companies do the way you do.
Yeah, I've got a lot of different customers that I interact with all the time, and it's different. Some companies get it, and some companies are kind of like the anti-DevOps.
Are you making tea on the side while you podcast?
Can you tell?
That's pretty. Well, I mean, that's pretty hardcore, man. That's you're not missing a beat.
I did warn you, right? I mean, did you see my text? Okay.
I finally did. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't see that before? I'm sorry.
No, I didn't.
Well, see, I had a reminder on my calendar to start at a certain time, and it was different than what he had sent out, and I was like, oh wait, what did I do? And anyway, here I am.
At least it showed up on your calendar.
Yeah, and I got tea, so
that's a plus.
Okay. I have my tea ready, so now I'm ready. See, if I didn't, I don't know if you drink tea, Jonathan or Josh, like if you leave the tea bag in the water too long, you've ruined it.
Yeah.
It gets gross.
It's very sad. So anyway, we could record a podcast if y'all are into it.
I'm ready, man.
What am I drinking? I am drinking.
You're cleared for takeoff.
Decaf black tea, just kind of straight Lipton. I didn't have a whole lot of decaf options in the pantry right now. And if I drink tea with caffeine right now, I will be up until 3 a.m. and sleep horribly. That was, I was asked in the chat, by the way. I did, not that I need much convincing to just, go off on a tangent, but anyway. Normally I drink, more interesting tea than just plain decaf Lipton, but anyway. Jonathan, are you ready to podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
I like
tonight
the chai.
I'm more of a coffee guy.
I do
fail.
I do too. I mean, I actually really appreciate chai, a good chai that's got a lot of kind of cinnamon taste in it, and my wife is allergic to cinnamon.
That's brutal.
Like EpiPen level.
Oh, I think you did tell me that at one point.
Yeah, it probably came up at some point if you ever met her, if we went to eat out somewhere. I was like, "Hey, is there any cinnamon in that dish?" So, I love Earl Grey tea, just not at night. I don't have any decaf Earl Grey.
Okay, I'll shut up so you can do your thing.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's our thing.
Right.
I mean, that's, tonight on the PowerScripting. I can't even say it anyway, so it's been a while.
It has been a while.
Tonight on the PowerScripting podcast, we are pleased to have Josh Duffney with us. Hey, Josh, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. So where are you based exactly, Josh?
I'm in Bellevue, Nebraska.
I was going to say Bellevue, Washington, but no, Nebraska. What's Bellevue? What's in Bellevue, Nebraska?
The Offutt Air Force Base mainly. So it's real close to Omaha, just south.
Okay. Not my part of town. I don't know a whole lot about Nebraska. I will admit to you right now.
A lot of corn.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it's. Is it cold there? You guys get pretty stiff winters,
I think
right?
it was 1 degree today.
Okay. Yeah, we had about 60 degrees ish, 50 something, 60
Sounds
somewhere
terrible.
Yeah, it's the worst.
above. Yeah. Actually, it was weird. We had this little mini spring a few days ago where it was like 70 for 3 days in a row. That's weird in the winter. But anyway, let's not talk about that. So, Josh, I would like to know a little more about you. Why don't you tell us kind of what you do and how you got there, and we'll just kind of go from there.
Sure. I guess I'll kind of start by saying it's a little surreal to be on the podcast. I was talking to John earlier. I think the first time I started listening to the PowerShell or the PowerScripting podcast was back in 2014 when I first started really diving into PowerShell and was listening to a podcast from with Steve Morawski talking about DSC, and that was really kind of the unlocking moment for my career. So this podcast has definitely played a big hand in where I've gotten so far in my career.
Awesome.
But to kind of start from the beginning, started at the help desk straight out of college, moved into a network administration. It was kind of like a one-man shop for a small bank. Learned a ton of the tech stack. Got to redo like racking 100-pound servers in the server room and running cables and color coding it. And then running a Citrix XenApp farm and upgrading the SAN. So I got to learn kind of all the pieces at that job. And then I moved to a bigger organization where I needed to, a frequent request is like, we need to disable 300 users. And that's kind of where PowerShell came in. And from there, I moved into managing the system center configuration manager. There's 2 people for like 32,000 endpoints. So we needed to leverage a lot of PowerShell. And got to sharpen that sword more. From there, I moved into a senior systems engineer role where I did a lot of Active Directory domain migration and automation, and kind of where I started the DevOps journey. And to fast forward to where I am now, where I've been for about 3 years as a DevOps engineer at Paylocity, where I've first started focusing on the release pipeline aspect, and since have spent like the last two years really focusing on infrastructure as code and bringing that into the organization.
Well, that's an amazing coincidence because I actually had no idea you were going to bring that up when I started talking about Gene Kim. So that will go over well then. So
it's such an amazing way to start your career. If for listeners out there, if you are new to IT and you get an opportunity to work in a small shop for a while, do it. Because you get to touch so many things, so many different areas. And that doesn't usually happen if you're in a big organization, where you're on a team that does one thing and, maybe you manage SCCM and that's all you ever touch. But the smaller firms, that's a great way to learn a lot in a short amount of time.
Well, there's a lot of negatives too, though. I mean, it's kind of... you have to do it all. You're a generalist. You can't specialize in anything. So your ability to exceed in any one particular area is limited by, the number of hours in the day, really.
Sure.
So it's tough.
But if you're starting, you get to figure out what you like before you specialize. If you want to specialize. Some people never do. So then I will ask you, Josh, do you want to do more or less working on Citrix?
Less. I haven't touched it since it's probably been 5 years.
So you learned something.
I did. Yeah.
That's great.
What I didn't like.
Yeah.
No, it was great. I mean, it was funny because I started my career in computer networking, and I wanted to go for the CCIE until I took the CCNA. But I wanted to be a network engineer, and for the reason was I didn't want to program. And then, fast forward 5 years into my career, and that's actually what I enjoyed the most about my job was coding with PowerShell.
So it's kind of funny how similar your story actually is to mine. Started in a help desk, also worked in Citrix. Now, the CCNA that I was looking at was actually for NetWare, so slight difference there. So the years were different. The versions of software were different. But yeah, that same path and having a bit of pain at some point where you realize, okay, I have to, create 300 of something. In my case, I had to deploy and configure, 50 VMs in a certain way. So, for you, as those 300 users, what was your thought process, and how did you kind of jump the, jump the gap in the sidewalk there to go from, okay, I can click my mouse a lot, and you realized at some point, no, I don't want to click my mouse to do that?
I think the first thing that got me thinking in that way was just my laziness. Like I just didn't want to have to click that many times. And then what's kind of propelled me forward throughout my career is to stand on the shoulder of giants that exist in the community. And so at the time I had spent, as the one-man shop and on the help desk, I had spent a good amount of time in the Spiceworks community. And so I kind of just used them as a kind of a bouncing board, because I didn't have a lot of, obviously as a one-man shop, I didn't have anybody to bounce ideas off of, and I used that community for that. And so I took it as an opportunity to kind of state my problem. And one of the recommendations in the forum post was, why don't you just do it with PowerShell? And then they gave me kind of like a little, basically like pseudocode of what I would need to do. And so I took that and I shared it with my team. I had a team of about 6 people at the time, and there was one person that had some Java experience. So he had some programming language experience. So we worked together to figure out how we would do that in PowerShell. So that's kind of how it happened. It kind of was started out of my laziness for not wanting to have to do that all the time and take, 3 hours to do it.
Mm-hmm. So did you encounter many people that were simply going to click the mouse that many times for those hours?
Yeah, 90% of the service desk.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of became an advocate, because like, you can do that in like 30 seconds. So, it's, and now it seems like you like to talk, share, document your experience. It looks like you're doing some training courses now as well. At some point, did you realize that, okay, why did you do that? Because I have my reasons. I know Jonathan and I have talked about this a lot in the past about like, why did you go start sharing these things that you're learning? I think at the beginning, I got to the point where I wanted to give back. I got so much from the Spiceworks community that I wanted to share, and I saw other people. I think more of it was trying to model the successful people that I saw in front of me. And so they were blogging and they were speaking at user groups. And then I found out that teaching was the best way to learn. And so it was a better way to kind of catalog the information I had in my own mind, is to put it in a format that I needed, that I could teach it in and present on it. And so it kind of ramped up my skill acquisition. And then, the dopamine side effect of people actually listening or, reading it and getting value out of it has definitely kept me going and wanted to continue that work.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I found the same thing. It's kind of like if you're going to retain something, you've got to do something with that. It could be hands-on, as like reading how to do something and then do something. It could be taking notes, and it could also be teaching somebody else. So in order to teach something, you have to know it to a certain degree. You have to know more than the person you're teaching, ideally. So it's like the right kind of motivation. I found.
For sure, and you also. You have to dive deeper into concepts. So I was just writing a series of blog posts with Ansible and Azure, and I realized that I knew vaguely the things that I was doing in Azure before, but when I went to write about it, I had to explain it at a deeper level, and so I had to go and do more research on that, and it deepened my knowledge of the platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that when I was writing my book that was about automating VMware with PowerShell, the number of bugs that I found in the VMware's code was incredible, because of the depth to which I was, having to get, all the way inside and understand all the edges of what it was that they had produced, so that I could, describe it to other people.
Right. You can't just gloss over it or try to catch around it anymore when you want to put it in a book.
Yeah. People know. It's. So let's talk about DevOps for a little bit. Tell me what kind of DevOps means to you, and when you heard of it, and what difference does it make? Because I think your IT career, your story is gonna be a little different from mine or Jonathan's, because we started in a world where it had never been heard of before, and yours is a time delta is going to be a lot different, a lot shorter.
Sure. So it was around the same time that I started. I probably had maybe 2 years experience in PowerShell, and DSC came onto the scene in 2014. And with that, the infrastructure as code really wasn't a big buzzword yet, and configuration management wasn't quite a thing on Windows just yet. And so DSC was kind of the only thing there. And you get to the point where you're trying to get this, imperative declarative language declarative language that's idempotent that you can deploy at your servers was really kind of the turning point, because mixed with that mindset of managing your infrastructure fit right into the DevOps movement. And so that was where it kind of clicked to me. And then I saw one of the chef keynotes was the kind of the turning point for me was the chef keynote, talking about the DevOps movement and, what it meant to them. And that led me to the Phoenix Project. And I read that book, and just like any IT professional that's read that book, you feel like they wrote it for you. And that is where I kind of got sucked into the world of DevOps, and I just tried to consume as much as I could through podcast, the Arrested DevOps podcast for sure, and a series of books is kind of how I got into it. What it means to me, it's a lot of things. For me personally, it's more of a mindset of continuous improvement and trying to figure out how you can improve the holistic system versus locally optimizing it for you. But there's a lot of facets in there. There's the culture aspect to it. There's the leadership aspect to it. There's the tooling behind it, understanding release engineering, so that way you can couple that with infrastructure as code. And then there's the SRE spin on DevOps, which is in my opinion, it's a more prescriptive implementation. And so if you can take that,
repeat that last bit. The what type of DevOps?
So SRE is more of a prescriptive implementation.
Site reliability engineering.
Yep. Oh, SRE. Okay.
Yep.
I was trying to find out was this like AWS S3, and I was trying to make that fit into your sentence, and it did not fit in my head. Please continue. Yes, SRE, of course.
And so there's just different practices and principles that you can apply in there, like monitoring your toil and trying to get 50-50, where you have 50% of your time engineering and then 50% of your time toil, which is kind of like the day-to-day firefighting that you got to stay ahead of. And that's really the hardest part as system administrators, is getting the level of toil to a level where you can spend more time engineering. That then would reduce the toil even further. But yeah, that's kind of my long answer to it, I guess. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of facets to it.
So what have you seen? So were you a part of a journey to DevOps, or was it something that those around you, including leadership, were doing already, or you just, it kind of fell right in, or did you have to actually change some minds?
In the first gig that I was in, when I was doing DSC, where I was a senior systems engineer, I tried to get a movement going, but it was a very large enterprise, and there was a lot of cultural friction to even to automate server builds. So I did it for our team.
Oh, good Lord.
I did it. We did it for our own team. It just never really took off beyond our team. Even using source control for infrastructure scripts didn't really go beyond our team. And then an opportunity came where I am now. And so I joined the DevOps movement, I'd say, at that point. And it's been an interesting journey, because I feel like we were in what the Team Topologies book calls, a DevOps pattern, but then we kind of slid into an anti-pattern over the last, I don't know, it was like 2 years. And now we're trying to slide back out of that. So it's been an interesting progression.
Mm-hmm. So what are some, you just said anti-pattern, what are some patterns or practices that are important to you?
So you're talking about more from an engineering perspective or organizational design perspective?
They're both good topics to hit. So I think the organizational one is of less, I don't know that I want to spend a lot of time on it, but it's important. Like it's to your point about having a company and a culture that wasn't going to change. If you don't have leadership support for DevOps culture, then you're not going to get very far. You just are not. Do you have anything else to say? Kind of add to that. Otherwise, we'll switch to the engineering side.
The only thing I'd add is, while you're there, it might not be your long term, but there's definitely things that you can do to skill up. And what we can get into next, which is like the engineering side with infrastructure as code, getting familiar with software development practices like using source control, And then release management, so understanding how pipelines work. Those are the things that you can take advantage of while you're there that might not take on, but you can skill up yourself enough that you'll be very valuable in the next gig.
That's a good point. So, I mean, let's take some of those in turn and let's treat. We talked about some of these on the podcast in the past, but I think it's okay to kind of go back to basics a little bit. So, source control. If somebody is not using source control today, where would you suggest they start? And what are some of the reasons that you really need to go there?
Sure. So yeah, source control is it's kind of the foundational piece to a lot of it. If you're going to do the release engineering, if you're going to do infrastructure as code, where I'd started is a public GitHub account. That's where I started, and it was weird to log in there the other day and look at my PowerShell repo that was started in 2013. And that's where I put my first script. And I think the script that I used to move those 80 users is in there. It's parameterized as a function now, so it's not, doesn't have any sensitive information. So I would start that, but make sure that you sanitize everything. Obviously, don't put your DA creds in GitHub. Just a little pointer there. But I would start there and just get familiar with committing and not having V2 of the script and V3 of the script. Getting used to kind of the basic, git add, git commit, git push, git pull. And start there. And then if you need internal, there's probably some kind of source control system internally. Hopefully it's Git. Git's kind of the standard now. You could use TFS. But that's where I'd start. I'd really start with trying to build your public presence, because two things for me that it helped with is it made me sanitize them and think about my code a little bit more clear. And then two, it makes it visible. If someone's not looking at it now, they might look at it in the future. And I know when we review candidates now, we look to see if you have any kind of artifact like that we can look at and see the work that you do.
Good point. So, Jonathan, you guys use source control?
Yes. Yeah, we use Git. We have an internal Git or GitHub repository.
Same here. It seems like a bit of a de facto standard. If not, you get the protocol, not necessarily GitHub the product, but often GitHub the product. So
when I started out, it was TFS.
Yeah, same.
It went to GitHub very quickly.
Actually, no, I lied. Depending on where I was, I do remember CVS and SVN for a little while.
Okay.
There. So I know that there's a lot. I mean, somebody installing Git for the first time, there's a lot to it. You mentioned a couple of kind of high-level verbs there. Are there some things that you would stay away from that you would tell people to, you don't need that one right now?
Rebase, probably, or
YOLO.
Avoid merge conflicts in the beginning, I would say would be my advice there. So
go look up. I'll put a post in the chat in a second here. Get YOLO script.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
There it is.
And be prepared to cry like the first 2 days as you learn it, but it'll be way better after the 2 days. So just at least give it 2 days, and then see how you feel.
Yeah. So Git YOLO, just for those that would appreciate it, it's an alias to git commit, and then send a log message of deal with it. And then ampersand git push -f origin master. So you're just gonna just smash everything with
I'm
your
gonna do that
commit.
tomorrow. It's gonna be good.
That's one of those career or resume generating events.
I forget the individual who posted it. I think it came from Nick Craver, but he was saying, like, I love the Git commits my team makes, and one of them said more yak shaving, or I shaved the yak, I think was the commit message.
I worked with
something descriptive,
I worked with a couple of guys that figured out you could put emojis in your Git commit messages, and it was just all emoji madness after that for those guys. All of my repos are my repos. Like, I never collaborate with anybody, which is kind of weird, but it's just been the way it's worked out. So
Same here.
I've never had to deal with that.
I think that's probably going to be
stuff.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be a fairly common pattern for those who come from the admin side, where you're not collaborating on a large project, with a big team of developers. Would you agree?
That's been my experience for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I do totally appreciate source control, but yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Very, very rarely am I actually collaborating with someone on the code that I make.
So what about you, Josh? What are you doing?
I've been on the other end, so I've been on both.
Okay.
I started that way where it was just my stuff, and I'd write some scripts. But then as I started to build tools that other people use, has been the biggest benefit that I've seen from the source control system. And then also now we're heavily implementing Ansible for configuration management.
Okay.
And I have my entire team working on a single code base, and so it's been pretty critical to have a feature branch workflow through Git, so that way we don't collaborate each other all the time.
Do you have a Tower instance or AWX or?
We have a Tower instance. Yep.
Okay.
So we could probably talk a little bit about, let's talk about infrastructure as code, the concept there and why it's important. What are your thoughts, Josh?
For me, it's where the system administration and automation meets release engineering. And so to kind of dive into release engineering, that's, continuous integration and continuous deployment. So continuous integration would be a process, typically the build process, where when you're looking at infrastructure code, it's going to lint your code. So it's going to make sure that there's, that it's functionally right. So if it's Ansible, it's going to be Ansible lint. If it's JSON, there's tools for that. And it's just going to make sure that it's, syntactically correct and following usually some kind of a standard, like the name's not too long or there's no white spaces here. And then it'll go in and you can do some kind of functional tests, unit tests, and then it'll produce an artifact. And that artifact will be put to your continuous deployment tool. So that tool is going to take that artifact, and Ansible speak, it's going to be YAML files, and ARM templates, it's going to be JSON for now. Hopefully they'll get YAML in the future. And it takes that and then it deploys it and it goes and runs the thing. And so that's the release engineering aspect. And then infrastructure as code is really the development workflow of all of that. So having your local development experience be good with that product and be able to develop locally and deploy against certain resource stacks that are in development, and then committing to master or doing a PR into master, and then having that automatically go through is kind of like the full life cycle of infrastructure of code, in my opinion.
So if you were talking with someone who is, they're basically deploying servers manually, and this is kind of an alien concept to them. Step one, what does step one look like to thinking about infrastructure as code?
Step one is in my opinion, it's documenting what your server looks like. So whether that be in a wiki page or whether that be a PowerShell script, is step one is getting that documented and automated. And then from there, it's really easy to say, okay, well, I have this PowerShell script that installs X, Y, and Z and puts X, Y, and Z features on the box. What does that look like in DSC? What does that look like? Whatever the tool that you're going to use for the configuration management aspect of it, then you just basically translate that automation into that script. And then at that point, I would worry about figuring out how to run it, and then you'd work it into a pipeline. There's a really fantastic white paper by Michael Green and Steve Murawski on the release pipeline, and that highlights the overall process really well. I use that as a North Star for a lot of, the beginning of my diving into infrastructure as code.
So we should probably talk about declarative state configuration then. That's kind of directly related. So I'll link to that. Actually, it looks like I found an interview with Steve Murawski and Michael Green on Run As Radio. They're friends of ours. So we'll drop that link in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a YouTube video from a previous PowerShell summit that Michael Green did on that.
I think they both talked about it in a lot of places. I'm seeing a lot of hits. So
okay. Yeah, I know Michael Green was on a tour.
Microsoft white paper I found.
Of talks for that for a while.
And that's a broken link. Oh well, we'll find that one later.
I would say it's important to note that it's not doing anything that you couldn't do manually. It's taking all those steps and putting it into a codified system that automatically does it for you.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing them already. You're testing to a degree. you deploy the server out with the template, you log in, you run some commands or you install some exes, and then you validate, you click IS or you make sure the page loads. It's just taking all that manual stuff, just like you would write a PowerShell script for some kind of process, and putting it into a declarative format, and then having automation and pipelines deploy it out.
And the Windows support for Ansible is pretty stellar.
Is it really?
Yes.
It is, yeah.
It is
I've not
really
touched that
good.
in a long time.
I mean, you can install chocolatey packages. You can do feature management. You can do registry keys. You can do almost anything you would want to do on a server. Mm-hmm. There's an Ansible way to do it. Or mm-hmm. and if you can't figure it out, you just use PowerShell and do it that way.
Right,
or DSC.
Right. Yeah, or DSC.
Yeah, I've been using Ansible for about a year and a half, and I have not written a single custom module.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk about the thing that runs the things that you create. You've got these modules. You have the scripts. You might start from a point of a one-off, right? I need to tweak this registry key in order to affect some sort of configuration. But now, I mean, it's kind of like when you're thinking about software, source revisions, and then you're thinking about builds and pipelines. So how do I get to that pipeline stage, something that's going to do the running of the things that I'm making? So there's some tools that are, or patterns that kind of help make that smooth.
For sure, yeah. There's definitely three tools that we use. So I'll just kind of talk about our pipeline at a high level, and hopefully that'll give some context. But the tools can be interchangeable. So there's usually a tool specifically for CI, and then there's a tool specifically for CD, typically in an environment. And then sometimes, in our case, we actually have a third tool for configuration management. And so the configuration management is used to basically house and control the orchestration of the build of the server and the configuration of the server. And the CI is the process that lints them and builds the artifact for you. So that's really just like to produce an artifact that can be deployed out. And that artifact is usually just the code that's been tested for whatever the system. And then you have your vehicle, your deployment one, that'll go out and it'll run it. And so in our case, since it's Ansible, it'll spin up a container, and then it will run the playbooks that will make all the configuration happen. And so we have that CD tool actually execute the Ansible stuff. But there's usually like 3 links in the chain.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead, John.
In your pipeline, when you're calling Ansible, are you using REST calls against Tower to kick it off from there, or are you doing it directly from the container?
We're doing it, we're kind of in the middle of a transition. So right now we're moving towards a fully using the container and not using Tower at all. And we use Tower mostly for delegation. And the reason for that was we didn't have a way to self-contain the artifact. So in Tower, you have your project that every time you update from the source, which is a Git repository, it updates the package, or it updates the project. And so you don't have any way to go back through your revisions other than to go back to source control. And so we just had a lot more comfortability with our deployment tool. And so what we chose to do is to just bundle that up into a NuGet package, or actually a zip file that would be deployed down to the container, run, and then there's still a release in that system that says this is the exact code and host files that was run with that release. Yep. And version locks all the requirements YAML for the roles. And so everything's version locked and kind of in a build artifact at that point.
Nice. And what are you mainly deploying? Windows servers, Linux servers, containers? What do you?
Majority Windows servers, and a handful of Linux servers at this time. Yeah.
I guess you wouldn't do that for containers. That'd be
kind
of weird.
It's been really interesting to look at the Ansible operator for Kubernetes, because I see a lot of potential in that, and it makes me feel good that I didn't, waste 2 years investment in Ansible. If I wanted to straightly dive purely into Kubernetes, there's actually a place for Ansible in that world as well.
Is it really? I mean, I feel like there's some shoehorning going on sometimes. I'm not saying that there isn't a place. I'm just saying, like, everybody's got to find their way to, integrate with or be a part of the ecosystem when the new hot thing comes out.
I think that's true to a degree, but it's also one thing that I've learned throughout the process of infrastructure as code. It really heavily depends on the skill set and the familiarity of the team that's working with it. And so I think having all those different operators and having everybody be able to leverage Kubernetes is just going to make it more adoptable, because then I don't have to go and learn per se, maybe the native Kubernetes manifest where I can write it in YAML in the way that Ansible would write it and be able to deploy it. So I think it just makes the learning curve less when it kind of everybody has a piece of that pie. But I think there are varying degrees of success will those be implemented, and time will tell, I guess, how well Ansible will pan out in that ecosystem.
So what would you say some of the things that have to go away or have gone away or are going away as a result of shops basically getting into SRE and DevOps style?
Things that are going away.
I mean, in the sense of naming conventions, having to have some sort of naming convention for each individual server in a farm. If you're automating these things, you think less about, it's much less important to have a naming convention for your servers.
I think the thing for me would be the point-click administration. Not to harp on that too much, but I think if I didn't understand PowerShell or I didn't have some kind of like a scripting language background, all these tools would be super, super hard for me to understand, because I would have no programming language chops to be able to understand what they're doing, because it's just an abstraction, a DSL abstraction of Python or PowerShell underneath the hood. And so having that background has definitely allowed me to dive deeper into the tools. And without that, I think I'd be kind of lost and super dependent on a higher level abstraction. So I think that would be a good one.
And that's and we probably list off a few others, but to talk a little bit more about the point click thing is, I think it's whichever you learn first kind of does set some brain patterns that you might have to unlearn. So I feel like because when I started computers, we didn't have graphical interfaces. It was still DOS, for a little while there, and then before Windows came along. If you start with Linux, for example, if you want to learn how something, how the init process for, the processes work, or, how many CPUs are in my system, it's all a file on the file system somewhere that you can examine. So if you're starting from a place where, in order to learn about the environment, you have to look at the, these various text files, you're going to think about things differently than if the way to learn about something is done through a visual process with a mouse.
100%. I mean, sometimes that's still ingrained in me where I have to click through it. Azure's a good example where I have to click through it in Azure, and then I'm like, now I know how to do it in PowerShell.
So, I see here that you did some Pluralsight videos in the past. Are you still doing those? And what was that experience like for you?
I haven't in a while. I'm just trying to figure out where I can contribute the most value in that space. But I have, and I really enjoyed the process.
I feel like half the Pluralsight authors have been on the podcast at some point. It feels that way.
Especially the PowerShell space.
Yeah. All of them.
I wondered why you had a legit microphone.
Does it sound good?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, it works well. So, what are the things that you like to talk about and work on most lately, in the past 3 months kind of thing?
I've been really diving into Azure more. I've avoided Azure in the cloud for a number of years, far too long. And so that's been a lot of my focus lately. And then kind of coupling that and learning Azure more through Ansible is a lot of the content that I've been generating lately has come from. But I've also been taking a really good look at Kubernetes and containers and just trying to get a sense for how that can apply. And there's a YouTube video interview that I was watching with Kelsey Hightower that he like summarized my exact thoughts after I read probably 4 chapters in Kubernetes in action as I dove into it. This is the type of system that I've always been trying to build as a system engineer. And so I'm really fascinated by that. There's not a lot of places to plug it in. We're getting some POCs started off the ground with it right now. But it's definitely a technology that more for a mental model and to see where the industry's headed is why I'm diving into that in my spare time.
I like the aspect that the things that are being built are microservices that are typically stateless, and the things that are running the code are little pieces with with defined interfaces between them. So it's like you're building something out of blocks, and those blocks connect together in a way that's pretty predictable, and they do a relatively simple thing. So you have a service or a microservice that's going to do this one little thing and do it well. And as long as it interfaces, everything interfaces between, as they are expected to, the system works. Do you find that in this world of microservices that it's easier or harder to troubleshoot, to understand how a system works?
Yeah, well, the microservices I can speak to, they don't scale well on, basically, I'll take a step back there. You need to scale your infrastructure architecture with microservices. You can't expect microservices to just lay on top of your traditional infrastructure and then overload them. So in an example of like a Windows IIS server, you need to scale out those Windows servers in a way that makes sense, where you're not blowing them up to a very large size. Mm-hmm. But I think it's both ways. I think it makes it harder to trace them. It's not one box that has the things that you go in and do. You have to have more observability. And so that's where the kind of the components of DevOps and SRE, with that huge emphasis, especially in SRE on monitoring, comes into play. Microservices just brings that need to light quicker, in my opinion, and it's an experience. Without an automated way of monitoring your systems and microservices, it's just really difficult, almost impossible to do.
So you mentioned a buzzword we need to go back and expand on a little bit. So observability, what does that one mean to you?
I'm still diving into it. So I'm very much ramping up on the curve. So I can't speak
I have
a whole
one,
lot to
but
that.
I want to actually ask Jonathan what you think about observability.
Does that mean monitoring?
That's what Glenn in the chat says.
Okay.
So observability to me is basically realizing that if you need to be able to operate something and troubleshoot it, you have to have all the information related to the runtime of that. And that includes application logs, it includes metrics, and it includes traces as code execution context changes within an application. So it is having those three things in a central place that you can do analytics against them.
So we actually, on my larger team, have been working on the logging and the metrics, and traces are coming at some point, but that's not something that at least our team provides yet. There are probably other teams that are collecting traces, using whatever tool they use. But as far as from a monitoring team perspective, it's not there yet.
It is monitoring, right? It's all related, but the concept of let's say that you encounter a bug in your software, and the question might be of somebody in a support realm or a developer was, "Hey, can you reproduce it?" Well, if you have all of those things, you shouldn't have to reproduce it. You should have all the information you need in order to understand what happened and when and why.
Yeah, you should be able to correlate that data based on the logging and the metrics and the trace. Okay,
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Having the picture of what happened without having to make it happen again. That's what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All of the things.
Makes sense because it's like a bird's eye view of the typical process where you have monitoring set up. You've been alerted that there's a problem. You don't know what it is yet. CPU's high, for example. And then you go to your dashboard or wherever it is, or even go to the VM. You're like, oh, yep, CPU is high. And then you go and look at the processes. So that'd be another part of it, right? Or the logs. And then from there, a lot of people get lost. It's like, okay, well, what's causing this? And there's where the tracing is. And a lot of people haven't gotten to that point, including a lot of the systems that we use.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, these are patterns that if you have some of the APM tools then you're getting an aspect of those traces because the APM agent is sitting inside there of the runtime, and it knows when when a particular function was entered and exited, maybe some information that was passed between your call stack and things like that. That's that level of detail that helps you if a problem happens and you have the traces, then you can determine, okay, well, what led to that? What went into that particular function, and why did it take so long? Was there an anomaly here in the amount of time that it took to execute this function that, the release that we did yesterday, before that, it didn't take as long. Things like that.
What tools did you say?
Who, me?
Yeah, the ATM tool? No, ADM?
APM. I'm sorry. Application was it APM? Application performance monitoring.
Okay.
It's a category, not a tool.
Okay.
I'm trying to be agnostic because I sell things in this area, so don't want to do that on podcast. So
you're saying the Splunk might be a good solution?
I did not say that. You said that. No, thank you. So, and this is all good stuff where I think that this is kind of where people need to go. They need to be comfortable with some of these concepts. And if you kind of find yourself, what do you do if you find yourself in an environment where the people around you are hard to motivate, hard to get into the swing of putting all your infrastructure directives into some state configuration, putting these creating these scripts that run. What would you start to do if you wanted to kind of motivate the people around you?
I would lead by example. That's been the biggest. That's been what I've done, I guess, throughout my career, is try to lead by example. So, kind of taking back to the source control, but it didn't exist. I created my own little TFS repository, and then I ran out of team members because I got enough. I advocated enough that I got people in there. So I went past the threshold, and then we had to actually graduate to Git in an internal system, and I started to create connections and relationships with some of the release engineers at the time, and then they helped us set up our own Git repository in their source control system. So I'd say lead by example. Figure out ways that you can implement these tools and technologies. Try to find other people that are interested in them, and then bring them into the fold and collaborate. And then hopefully it'll take hold. And if not, you've learned a ton, and you can take that with you to the next place if that's what you choose to do.
That's a good answer. I like that. So you've mentioned Ansible a lot, and I know Jonathan has as well. What do you like about it?
I like the simplicity of it, that it's lightweight. It has, being agentless, it has its pros and cons. We've run into some scenarios where an agent would be nice, but that's one of the pluses overall, I think, for me. But it's really the simplicity of the language of the DSL itself and the flexibility that it gives you.
I find it's very robust too. It just works the way that it says it works.
Right.
And I don't find myself jumping through hoops to make things work. Normally, if I'm adding something to a configuration, when I'm testing or building one out, I just add a section, it works. I add the next section, it works. It's a great tool.
Can I say that one reason I never got into DSC was because I felt it was kind of overcomplicated, and Ansible is kind of like the opposite of that, to me.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So what else have we left out? Oh, YAML. I wanted to say, okay, so you like YAML better than JSON. What's that about?
I really don't have a preference. So it's really interesting. Before we got Ansible and started using it, I actually wrote an open source module called Invoke DSC, which abstracts DSC to JSON, because I agreed it was overcomplicated and I didn't want to compile them off. I wanted to straight up use Invoke DSC resource, and then use a DSL that made more sense to me, which in that case was JSON, and it was more friendly to developers that I was using that were my customers, and that I wanted to have that embedded with their code base to provision their app pools and IS stuff. And so I've got a really, a fondness for JSON, because I kind of wrote my own DSL on that. But YAML, it's nice for longer things. It's just easier to read. There's less on the screen. It's more compact. So I like both. I really don't have too much of a preference. I'm not a diehard on either side.
Okay, so Go ahead, John.
The thing I love about JSON is the JSON commandlets.
Yeah,
they just make things so easy, because there's so many times that I'm, doing a REST call against some endpoint and getting a JSON body back, and then I just convert it to an object and do whatever I want, and then create another JSON body and post it. Mm-hmm. I end up doing a lot of that kind of stuff.
I would agree with you. Yeah, the data manipulation, or the object manipulation rather, in PowerShell with JSON is awesome.
So are you doing anything with Windows 7 yet? I'm sorry.
Windows 7?
PowerShell
like,
7.
Okay.
Whoa.
You should be getting rid of it is what you should be doing.
Yeah, actually, I switched to a Mac about maybe 9 months ago now. And so I did that just to get out of my comfort zone with Windows and to force myself to use PowerShell.
I did the same thing.
I also did the same thing.
Cool.
It's funny.
Yeah, so I love PowerShell. The V7 one. I've been on release 2 now for a little while. The error output is phenomenal, and I'm really stoked to see DSEs getting some attention, and those commands are coming into the fold. But I've really not missed anything from 5.1. Some of the modules like AD, but I remote into a Windows box and I import them. So I really like it. It's super fast.
I wish that I was doing the types of things that I used to use the invoke parallel function for, that uses the run spaces to use that new functionality, because, oh man, I would have killed for that about 3 years ago. So I'm very happy that's going to be in the product.
So I haven't even looked at PowerShell 7 yet. I'm embarrassed. I need to get on it.
There's some good stuff. Yeah, and there's even going to be credential management, which I saw a couple things about that.
How are they doing that?
And so basically it would use a credential store, like whatever Azure Credential Manager or whatever that thing is called, and kind of automate getting those credentials and then allowing them to use them inside your code. I think that's the one they're starting with, but then they're going to provide support for other credential repositories. But that's something that I saw like a presentation about, and the presentation wasn't that technical, so I don't know the details of that yet.
That would be really cool.
Yeah, I actually want to have somebody from the PowerShell team come on if we can find somebody who would be a good candidate to talk about that. I need to talk to Jason Helmick about that, because he said he could help us out finding the right people to talk to.
Well, I will have to. We should have somebody to come on to talk about what's new with 7 in general.
We did.
Oh, never mind. I was not listening to anything you just said. I should say
we did the first round of that.
You know what? I missed an episode.
Yeah, I know you weren't there for that. And one of these days, I'm actually going to put that in the feed. So that people can.
All right, so I have someone.
I'm the worst.
Excuse.
Yeah, but yeah, Jason Helmick was actually on.
Okay.
And
now that makes sense. What you just said.
Yeah, I think you were in Florida or something. I don't remember exactly why you weren't there for that. But yeah, he was talking about the kind of the transition from the Windows PowerShell and PowerShell Core, which we have been calling the open source version of PowerShell. That name change with 7 is just going to be called PowerShell. So that type of transition, and 7 is going to be kind of the big release that they're hoping kind of gets us over the hump in terms of, companies adopting the new version of PowerShell and that sort of thing, because the adoption that they've had so far is like way biased to the Linux side, and which they were really shocked. But the Linux adoption of PowerShell has been really high compared to the using it on Windows.
Really?
Yeah, and eventually they are going to ship PowerShell in Windows, but when that happens, they weren't really sure the last time that we talked about it. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on in that space. They're, I think, Is RC2 actually out, Josh? Or is it like really close to coming out?
Let me
Do you know? I think it's really close to coming out. Or if it came out, it may have been within the last couple
really
days.
Really close, because I'm still on 1. I think I'm on the latest, yeah.
So yeah, we're getting close to PowerShell 7, which is going to have, it's going to be a major release.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome.
I'm seeing in the chat room that RC2 just shipped. It dropped today.
Oh, today, dang. Nice.
Thank you.
I better
thank
brew
you.
update right now.
Thank you, Stephen.
It's not there. I just looked.
Oh.
Yeah, I have to.
There's a lag
tap
I've noticed with Brew when they release the new stuff. Usually it's a day or two before I can do it the easy way.
Make it happen. Excellent. So maybe we should kind of close with, what do you see in the future? What are you excited about as 2020 starts?
I'm really starting to skill up more in Azure. So I just passed my AZ 103, going for the AZ 400 next, and I'll probably go for some of the architecture stuff.
Awesome.
And just trying to move towards a more a cloud native patterns is really where the next focus for me is going to be, in whatever skills and technology that encompasses.
So then we should probably ask you a question about Jonathan, first computer, I guess.
Well, before we do that, let's make sure that we point people at his GitHub repo and his blog and that kind of thing. So where can people track you down and see the kind of stuff that you're working on? I see here that you do some speaking, you do some blogging, that kind of stuff. Let's let people know about that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, my blog's Duffney.io, so just my last name with IO at the end. I have a couple Pluralsight courses out there. Debugging PowerShell with VS Code is one of my more popular ones there, and then a regex introduction to regular expression. Twitter is just Josh Duffney, and then my GitHub is just Duffney. If you want to kind of look at some of the code that I've written.
Very cool. Are you speaking anywhere? Do you have anything lined up this year?
I don't have anything lined up. I wasn't quite chosen for the PowerShell Summit this year, which is unfortunate, but maybe next year. Are
you going to do a lightning? Are you going to be there? I assume you're going to be there.
No, I won't be there.
Oh, okay. Are you going to be there, Hal?
No plans.
I know.
Where is it?
It's in Seattle. Yeah, it's in Bellevue.
Okay.
And actually, they're having 2 starting this year. They're having kind of a one that's a lot closer to us. I think it's in, is it Tennessee? I'd have to look it up.
Really?
Maybe. I think it may be in Chattanooga.
Yeah, I think so.
I think so. I don't need much of a reason to go to Chattanooga.
Yeah, it's really close, right? For us.
I shall have to research that thing.
Nashville. Thank you.
Okay.
Stephen comes through again. So I will be at the one in Bellevue. I don't know if I will be at the one in Nashville.
DevOps Automation Summit, Nashville. PowerShell plus DevOps Global Summit.
So I'm being told that
in October, looks like.
CFP opens in March. So it's going to be later in the year. I think they're planning to do it in the fall, so it'll be kind of a spring in Bellevue and then fall in Nashville. And I don't know if the Nashville venue will stick the way that it is kind of stuck in Bellevue or not. Or if it'll move around. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. Well, then let's go back to the question that I almost and failed to ask you, Josh, which is, actually, Jonathan, I'm so out of practice of this. That's not the first question at all. First question is, if you could be a superhero, who would it be and why?
Oh, man.
Yes. I'd forgotten about that. It's been too long.
It has been too long.
If I could be a superhero, what would my power be?
Oh. Yeah. No, you got some time to think about it. I mean, I realize this is a pretty serious moment.
This is a very serious moment because I heard this question asked so many times.
But the superhero landscape has changed so much since the last time we asked this question.
It really has.
We've had, a bajillion Marvel movies and DC stuff and TV shows. And
I don't know. I think I'd want to be like Tony Stark and be able to create all the crazy robot stuff and be able to figure all the stuff that he does. I think that's what.
So really kind of the genius with who doesn't sleep much.
Yeah, kind of like that. Yeah,
you got to be the billionaire though.
Yeah, the billionaire genius.
Add the money in there.
Yeah. You got to have the resources.
Yes, that's a good one. That's a good one. I think that Jonathan, if you were to pick another one, I think I remember. Was yours Hero?
Yes.
So if you were to pick another one today, not Hero, who would it be?
The Flash.
Wow, that was quick.
Yeah.
Quick. So why the Flash?
So it had to be quick.
I love the Flash, the TV series. I'm a big fan.
I watched the first series. I probably watched the first two series, something like that.
Yeah, he's
seasons,
very that power. The way they depict it is extremely powerful. That'd be fun.
When I watched it, it really didn't get past the running fast. It was just starting to get into the time travel-y type of aspects. I'm sure it's gone way past that since then. I've not kept track.
Yeah, they're in the middle of a enormous crossover right now that they just finished up between like 5 different shows.
Neat. In the DC universe,
the DC TV, CW.
Arrow and yeah.
Yeah, it's like Arrow and Black Lightning and Legends of Tomorrow and Batwoman and The Flash.
Okay, cool.
I think that's all of them. Oh, Supergirl.
Who's that guy in Legends of Tomorrow that he has a hot and a cold ray or something like that?
So that's 2 different people.
It is, okay.
Yeah, so the guy who had the heat ray is gone. Rory, the guy who has the cold gun, Captain Cold, is still around. They don't call him Captain Cold, but he's probably my favorite character on that show. He's so funny.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Cool. Good to know. All right, well.
So, Josh, we've stalled.
Well, I mean, he went with Iron Man.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That counts.
My brain.
That's okay. Well, Josh, thank you very much for spending some time with us and kind of exploring DevOps and that space. One of my favorite topics anyway, as you probably guessed by me leading with, Gene Kim anyway. So, like I said, that worked out really well.
Well, thanks for having me on the show. I mean, it's been a privilege to be on the show, and thank you guys both for continuing to do this. It's awesome content, and I always enjoy listening to the show. So thanks for having me.
Of course.
You're welcome. Our
Thank
pleasure.
you, everybody in the chat room, for hanging out with us and interacting with us and the guest, and we really appreciate you hanging around with us.
And for showing up with like 0 notice. That's really cool.
Yes.
I apologize that I did not do my due diligence and get the Twitter stuff out there the way I should have.
Oh, not a problem at all.
One day, Jonathan. One day.
Yeah.
Maybe a few years from now, we'll nail it.
It'll be that one glorious episode that everything goes perfect.
You will have figured out how to automate the placement of our camera feeds. Instead of, like at the stream starts, and you can see him dragging all the video around. That's one of my favorite Jonathan things. Just let y'all know. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and talk to you next time.
All right. Good night, everybody.